that 1 second to come on. No.
Try about that. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Scare myself. Friends, welcome this morning here to Westminster. We are so glad that you are here for this event celebrating Randal Jelks' most recent book in conversation. So I'm going to introduce him in just a moment. For you folks that are from Westminster, do you notice anything different this morning? The pipes are back. Our organ pipes got reinstalled this week, and so we are excited. Nobody had so much view of the inner workings of the organ as we had the middle sections all gone for about the last 6-7 months, so we're glad for that. Well, again, we are so glad that you are here, whether you are a person who joins with Westminster on a frequent basis, whether this is your first time here, whether you are from one of our partner congregations or from the community, we are so glad that you are here. I am so pleased to introduce Dr. Randal Jelks this morning. He is the professor of African and African American Studies and American Studies at the University of Kansas. I hope I got all that right. There's a lot of titles there. He is the author of 2 award-winning books, African Americans in the Furniture City, The Struggle for Civil Rights in Grand Rapids, and Benjamin Elijah Mays, Schoolmaster of the Movement, a biography. He has also written Faith and Struggle in the Lives of 4 African Americans, Ethel Waters, Mary Lou Williams, Eldridge Cleaver, and Muhammad Ali. He has contributed to a collection of essays titled 42 Today, Jackie Robinson and His Legacy. His writings have appeared in the Boston Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books. They have appeared in blogs, in journals, in newspapers, and periodicals. Randal is co-editor of the academic journal American Studies. He is executive producer of the documentary film I Too Sing America, Langston Hughes Unfurled. He earned his PhD from Michigan State, his MDiv from McCormick Theological Seminary, and I think he's even got a bachelor's from the University of Michigan, so he's got all the rivalries covered. He is a fellow ordained clergy in the Presbyterian Church USA, and the reason he is here today is to share about his most recent book, and we are so excited to hear him speak about Letters to Martin, Meditations on Democracy in Black America. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Randal Jelks.
Thank you. So this is homecoming, and it's a thrill. I was saying earlier that you welcome a 26-year-old to Westminster full of, my grandmother would say, piss and vinegar. I said, full of myself coming out of McCormick, attempting to come to Grand Rapids and start a congregation, and that's a pretty bold move for somebody just freshly coming out of seminary. And my friends here at Westminster embraced us as a young family with then one child, and then the other, both of them singing for Ruth Nicely. Ruth Nicely got my son to sing, and that was a major accomplishment. So I thank you so very much for this opportunity to come and talk about this new book. And first of all, I want to give you a slideshow because I want to contextualize why and how I thought about this particular book, and then we'll talk about that. And I want to just talk about reverence and resistance. And you need to have a little bit of a demographics of most people don't think about denominations and so forth, but overwhelmingly in black communities, overwhelmingly still 45% of all African Americans are Baptists. And then comes 12% non-religious, and that's growing, just like it's growing all over America. In the United States, 1961 was the highest rate of church attendance. The Cold War era, when we were all still learning to do duck and cover, that was the highest rate of church attendance in the United States. It has precipitously gone down. The other group that makes up of African Americans are Methodists. Now a growing number of non-denominational Catholics, particularly in cities like Chicago, New Orleans, make up a large percentage. And of course, this demographic tells you a lot, and this demographic tells you a lot about American history. So this church comes out of the European Protestant Reformation. There are two sides of the Reformation. There's the Catholic side, and then there's the Protestant side of that argument. We often learn the Protestant side, Presbyterians, Scottish, the Kirk, and the Geneva tabs. But the Reformation, it really transformed Europe, transformed how governments work, because it really was just simply a religious argument. The Reformation was a political argument, and who's going to be in power. It was the original thrones. No kidding. So it's about who's going to take over what, and underneath this was a theological debate, but the Protestant Reformation between 1517, 1648, of course, also comes to what we call North America. I always tell my undergraduates, the part of the United States that I grew up in my initial growing up years was you want to tell a Catholic story. But actually we tell the story of New England, the British side. We don't tell the story of St. Augustine, Florida, which is the oldest city, would have been a Catholic, Spanish, and so forth. And simultaneously to the Protestant Reformation is also, if you look at this, is the African slave trade. So these two things come together, and we should often forget that there's a whole change going on in the world, both religiously from the European side and the importation of people of African descent coming in at the same time. Now, when I took Reformation history, these things were like separated, and I kept asking myself about this because I grew up a Lutheran. Yes, I grew up Lutheran, Missouri Synod Lutheran, and all the Lutherans look just like me in my church in New Orleans. And my church I'm proud to say, will be 135 years old in January. So all of these things are simultaneously happening. And so with all of life, people intersect in all kinds of different ways. And the largest amount of people of African descent are still to be found in the country of Brazil. And we often forget that the African continent is a continent, not a country, that has triple religious heritage. Religions of all the different regions of the African continent. Christianity goes from the 2nd century in Ethiopia. So the Scottish have nothing on the Copts in Ethiopia, right? The 2nd century, great monasteries, and Islam coming to particularly the Western Africa in the 11th century. So across the board, Africa, like all places, have this triple kind of heritage: indigenous religions, Christianity, and so forth. So some of the people who were brought in from we call the Kikongo, were already Catholic when they were brought in enslaved. So these are the ways that the Reformation intersects with the history of slavery, which was a global phenomenon. Black Protestantism, what I call it, by the 18th century, African Americans throughout the British colonies reshaped Protestantism to suit their own needs as an oppressed people. And this is why Black Americans joined both the Baptist Church and created their own Baptist churches and Methodists, but particularly Baptists because of water rights. In the Igbo culture, which is in Nigeria, water rights were very important, and full immersion baptism was a thing for them. And so this related to the kind of ritualized ways that they did things in West Africa. Now, my grandmother, who was born in 1906, and was fully immersed in the Mississippi River in 1918. And I did ask my grandmother, being a cheeky kid as I was, whether the doves came out when she was baptized, which I was proceeded to be smacked on the back of the head. But water rites and rituals were still, and Baptists the English Baptists were Calvinists, so there's a tradition, and they were anti-slavery. So Baptists allowed for more autonomy than other groups like the Presbyterians with our ways we understood the Bible and hierarchy and so forth. So the Baptists allowed for freedom. This is why people join the Baptist church. But everywhere you also bring culture with you. Separated from culture, and you mix culture and Christianity, or you try to get the words. So when I lived in Ghana, the question is, how do you translate snow to an equatorial place? Your sins will be clean white as snow. You can't, right? You can say as pure as water. But you can't say snow because what's snow if you've never seen snow? And if you live near a rainforest, you don't want any clothes on. Let me tell you that. That's why people have all kinds of rituals. Well, all through the United States, you find, even in New York City, the burial ground on Wall Street, people have where their bodies are buried in a position to the east, facing home. And so plantational burial paintings, this is from the historic New Orleans collection, all ritualized in some ways how one expresses oneself at home. The Baptists grew out of the English Reformation. And the English Reformation, it really begins with Henry VIII trying to figure out how to get a divorce. I think, people just don't have. When I was in seminary, it was all so. They should have more fun with this stuff, right? Right? Because he's trying to get a divorce, and he wasn't meant to be king in the first place. He's trying to get divorced, but you can't divorce the most powerful king's sister in the world. So you got to figure out. So you got to take over and form a church. And of course, Baptists and Puritanism all grew out of this. And Puritanism was an insult, right? Because you're trying to be the pure church, and that's why they were called Puritans. The denomination marked by anti-slavery stance and full of immersion baptism. And the first African Baptist church in Georgia, the building's still there, was organized in 1788. So to understand why, what motivates people it has to speak to people. Faith always speaks to people in some way or another. And it becomes an important point of resistance in their lives. Of course, the movement with the Church of England, the church that by Charles Wesley, we sing here. Many days we have sung Wesley songs in this church, like Martin Luther. They're all beer drinking songs. Those tunes. A mighty fortress is our God is a beer drinking, and you can hear it. Mighty fortress is our God, and then you tilt your stein, right? Wesley also was initially anti-slavery. What changes is money, right? Slavery makes people so much money in the world that, maybe we should compromise with this. This is capitalism at its beginnings, and I get into arguments with economists all the time. And I say, well, you're wrong about that. This is not some simple, even Adam Smith, the great Scottish thinker of Wealth of Nations, understood that this was a stimulus. The Methodists slowly kind of began to compromise with slavery. So did Baptists. And then the Wild-Eyed group, the Quakers, who really began to say, I don't think this is right. But the Quakers did make their money off of slavery and then said it was wrong. So, that's just how the world goes. One thing I can tell you, I used to tell students at Calvin College, I know about depravity. I'm not sure about the redemption part. The depravity, I'm for sure. We treat each other badly in religious organizations. So Baptists and Methodists were religious forefront of the battleground regarding issues of reverence for human life and dignity. I won't show it to you, the trailer from the movie that I do not like, because Amazing Grace, about the John Newton. I just think it focuses on the wrong thing. That's me being a movie critic, right? But the one thing we can say is that Methodists and Baptists and the Quakers, I should have also put it, were regarding what is the issues of reverence for human life and dignity. And this is why African Americans sought to join in those two groups. In Philadelphia, if you ever go to Philadelphia, just don't go to Constitutional Hall. You want to go to where Free African Society was, established by Absalom Jones and Richard Allen and other free blacks in 1787. So, the Constitution of the United States, some of y'all are the generation you had to remember this, was 1789. I have no idea when the Constitution was ratified today. I'm like, good Lord. In Illinois, when I went to high school, you had to take the Constitution test, and I'm like, oh boy, we got work to do here. But in Philly, the support of one another, Richard Allen is a Methodist. Absalom Jones would become the first Episcopal priest in the United States. They start the Free African Society. And also they protest having to have a segregated altar, a time to come to pray at St. George's Methodist Church in Philadelphia. And they staged, in essence, the first non-violent civil disobedience. They are made to sit in the balcony. They walk out the church to start their own, and it's a long history. And they start three independent churches. Mother Bethel Church, established in 1780, and the founding minister was Richard Allen. Absalom Jones will help establish St. Thomas Episcopal Church in Philadelphia, 1794. So at the very heart of all of this, the forming of the United States, are all these black religious communities, just like here, Westminster, are all starting and these churches are all arguing about the question of democracy. So sometimes people want to say, from the very beginning, this is all going on, and sometimes we don't recollect that history. We think of when I went to McCormick, one of the things that struck me, one of the first things, Dean Mudge, a guy named Lewis Mudge, was the dean. Then he was very had this very affect. John Witherspoon signed the Constitution, or the Declaration of Independence, and of course me, the cheeky kid, said, "Well, whose independence was it?" Because this is all going on simultaneously at the same time, and they are asking the question: just whose independence is it? For you who are Presbyterian, and if you haven't been the first African Presbyterian in Philadelphia, you should, because it's named First African Presbyterian still in Philadelphia, and it's formed in 1807. Simultaneously, people who are in various denominations are forming congregations to service the needs of their communities. And First African Presbyterian, that's exclamation marks that are on one, but the First African Presbyterian Church is founded by this man, Reverend John Gloucester, a former slave, and Black Presbyterians are at the heart of what is going on in the world. And what bothers me to no end is that there is no recognition that there's a long history of Black Presbyterian participation in what this struggle is going on, right? So it's really John Gloucester, Samuel Cornish founds the first Freedom's Journal, the first Black newspaper. He's a Presbyterian. Mary Keckley, if you all watched Lincoln, the seamstress in Lincoln, Mary Keckley goes to 15th Street Presbyterian Church, and see, below the guys with the great mutton chops, is my hero. One of my heroes is Henry Highland Garnett. And Henry Highland Garnett comes one vote away from saying all slaves should revolt in the United States in a violent revolt. And he's drawing on Scottish theology, and he's saying slavery violates the Sabbath. What an interesting argument. And down below is this wonderful woman, Lucy Craft Laney, in Augusta, Georgia, founding school, educating. So there's a whole history of the Presbyterian Church that when I came here, let me tell you this, I got to tell you this. I said, well, we need to start a church here. And I had several clergy say, well, people here don't look like Presbyterians. At the time, this is back in '83. Like, what? Well, I think they would have told you they were Presbyterians from the start. And that, Samuel Gloucester, Cornish is in New York, Henry Highland Garnett from Pittsburgh, they would have said, oh, that's mistaken. And you should know this history here at Westminster. So when you're inviting people in, you can say, well, there's a long history of Black Presbyterians from 1807, right? Philadelphia, where all the stuff about the country is going on. There is a long and rich history, and they are also debating about the shape of the democracy, right? Samuel Cornish founds the Freedom's Journal with John Rushworth, and they are saying, we want to speak for ourselves. By 1816, the African Methodist Episcopal Church as a denomination was founded. So in Grand Rapids, you have First Community African Methodist Episcopal Church is founded in 1816 by, the lead on that is, of course, Richard Allen, who's in the center of this picture of bishops. So the great scholar W.E.B. Du Bois said in the 19th century, this was one of the foremost organizations ever going across. African Americans want to speak a theology that speaks to them. Of course, just like all Protestant groups, Black Protestant congregations from their very outset face internal sexist politics. Who gets to preach? And that's been from the beginning, because does God reveal herself to just men? And Black women are at that forefront of this question as well. So all through the night, who gets to give utterance for God? This is a constant argument, not a recent one. Other great bishop is of the AME Church is Henry Mcneil Turner, who becomes the first chaplain, U.S. Army chaplain in the United States history. But not only his impact is that he takes the AME Church and spreads it in parts of West Africa all the way to South Africa. The AME Church is a global denomination. Of course, the Civil War comes along. This is just a clip from the film Glory. Again, bother you with, but the Civil War comes along and it opens up the possibilities that African Americans can start their own denominations. So I was just in Montgomery, Alabama. Last fall, this time I was in South Carolina, driving back through the backwoods of South Carolina. You see the spread of all these still wonderful, some really still greatly intact clapboard churches that former slaves had started for themselves. In point of fact, I'm a descendant of some of those people, right? In a town called Morganza, Louisiana. 1865, abolished. My great-grandparents founded a church, Bright Morning Star Baptist Church in Morganza, Louisiana, and a school. So African Americans didn't need somebody to tell them they needed a school. They started their own school. Now, they didn't have a teacher at times, but they started their own school to teach their kids how to read, to create a new kind of civil society. And this is how the South looks after the Civil War. People are building all these little churches all over the place. And why it's important is that one part of democracy is being held in these little churches. You got the deacon board if you're Baptist, and that's really important. And, you know, the pastor is called by the people, right? So these are the kind of fundamentals of democracy, the growth of independent Black congregations. They're making all kinds of arguments, whether holiness or other things, but they're all about what is the legitimate calling of people. And that is the process where democracy, any Presbyterian knows that, right? Where does this is the test question for you all. You know, what's the first local body of government in the Presbyterian Church? Come on, you know. You all had to pass there. And where's Jen? You had to pass there in the order. It's the session. And from the session, the presbytery. And from the presbytery, in our case, the synod. From the synod, the General Assemblies. Sounds kind of governmental, doesn't it? Even in these little congregations are the seeds of democratic discussion. And very important for us is to understand leadership. My grandmother was not afforded a full education in the state of Louisiana in her era. But I watched my grandmother lead a meeting, and Robert's Rules of Order, boy, she could whip that thing out and lead a meeting like nobody's business, probably faster than your session meeting, and tell you this is the beginning of how people think about their own governmental systems, how to run things, and how to train people in leadership. churches begin to grow west of the Mississippi. I'm in Kansas part of the time, and I've been all the way to a town called Nicodemus, Kansas. Nicodemus is, in 1877, former slaves say, no more. Can't take it anymore. We're going to leave Tennessee. We're going to leave Mississippi. And some get all the way to Nicodemus. And if you get to Nicodemus, you're getting close. You're about 3 hours away from Colorado. And you imagine 1877 horse buggy and all of this. But the AME Church is the official church that leads this westward. Up at the top here is where I am, Lawrence, Kansas. This is St. Luke Ame Church. This building has just been redone in Nicodemus now. It's a historic site. But these are the two AME churches west of the Mississippi, already out there. Top church is most famous, and the AME Church in Lawrence is most famous for, if you ever read Langston Hughes, the Big C, his fake conversion at St. Luke AME Church, right? So these are important for us to understand that people are doing their own thing, that they are trying to test and grow leadership. And of course, by the late 1860s, Black Catholics are coming along, and we should note that St. Francis Xavier in Baltimore is dedicated 1864. And in 1892, there's the first Black Catholic Congress. Because I grew up in New Orleans, I'm way familiar with Black Catholics because my neighborhood where I grew up was real diverse, right? There was a Jewish synagogue around the corner. There were my neighbors, the Thibodeaus, were Black Catholics. I went to First Communion with my friends. And I was a Black Lutheran. And my grandparents were Black Baptists, so I had to go to church all the time, y'all. I really did. I went to all kinds of churches all the time. And I was sharing with my wife, one a funny story. Little neighbor next door to our house had a little Baptist church, and I would go to his revivals. You know, I was destined to be a clergy, I think. I would go to the revivals just to see what was going on. Of course, it was so different. You know, I grew up in a formal church, much more high church than this. And, you know, we acolytes, and, you know, we go to the altar on our knees to take communion and all of this other stuff and all of the creeds. I mean, you had to remember, I grew up Missouri Synod Lutheran, so you had creeds were really important. And you had to learn Augsburg Confession and all of the stuff. You know, I would want to go and see these different kind of churches. I fell asleep on the front pew. I must have been 10 years old, but I would put on my little suit and go. My grandmother said, well, why are you doing this? And I'd put on my suit, and the preacher was in an ecstatic mood, and I was sitting on the, knocked out, and he comes and he says, brother, do you want to be baptized? And I open up, my eyes are, you know, red. And I ran out of the church, which became hysteric. But there are all kinds of places people are arguing about why they worship. They're exercising their First Amendment right, the right to their faith tradition. Baltimore, New Orleans, and so forth. The Black Baptists begin really found by 1895, congeal to make up about 7.5 million African Americans as a denomination. And this is all of the places that our leadership is trained. There's leadership all over the country. So Ebenezer Baptist Church, built by A.D. Williams, the grandfather of Martin Luther King. Abyssinian Baptist Church. This is in Chicago. That's the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Baptist churches are all over the place, and these are the places where people could exercise their own leadership, their own sense of themselves. Even more important is Pentecostalism, because Pentecostalism today is much exceeded what we are, quote unquote, in churches. Because Pentecostals reached out to the Azusa Street Revival in Los Angeles in 1906. And this is led by William Seymour. He's another Louisianan, St. Mary's Parish, he and his wife. And what was different about the Azusa movement was an interracial movement. And this was all troublesome to at large. The interracial movement of that the spirit, whether speaking in tongues, was a movement of the spirit that cut across all people. So the rise of Pentecostalism, which is now a global experience. The Church of God in Christ, as one of the largest Pentecostal churches in the world, we affectionately, the black community, call it COGIC, founded by Bishop Charles H. Mason, 1861 1961. These are the churches. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last speech is given at Mason Temple in Memphis. That's the home of Church of God in Christ. Of course, even breakaway groups, the Nation of Islam, right? Elijah Muhammad, his wife Sarah, starting out of Georgia. People don't know this, that Elijah Muhammad was Elijah Poole. His family was from Georgia. And I was just at the lynching memorial down in Montgomery. And when he says white man's the devil, if you saw the county where he came from and the number of lynchings that went on, you might conclude the same thing. So that Christianity, he says, using Christianity, because he knows the Bible left and right, does not speak to the needs of African Americans. But these all come out of, it's the space to organize, independent space of the Black freedom movement. Without those churches, there is no freedom movement going on. And of course, the death of Martin Luther King, in my argument, puts black congregations, creates a crisis of because it follows I would make the argument, Eldridge Cleaver said when King was killed, Black Panther, he says, this is the last Christian in America to be murdered. So I wanted to give you this to give you some sense of when I'm writing this book, how I was thinking, what's the background in my head going on? What's the thing? Where are the conversations at? And where are where's the world going? So I wanted to just say that there's a whole world behind this that people are largely unaware of, even in their own respective traditions. So Methodists have no clue about African Americans, although they're Methodists. Presbyterians have no clue about the long history of the Dance Theater of Harlem. You wouldn't have the Dance Theater of Harlem without a Black Presbyterian church where it began. In Harlem. Yes. Yeah. Oh.
Sonia Pryor is watching online and says she wishes she could be here today.
Okay.
And she put on the chat on the live stream that she's really glad that you're helping give all this context and history, because she's often asked, how did you end up Presbyterian? And she said, her answer is, there is a long history of Black Presbyterians.
There.
As you said that, I was like, we need to hear Sonia
Yeah, yes. It wasn't just because Westminster's special. Sonia's family was Presbyterian down in Kentucky. But we don't know, right? Because there's this long history. And there's a long history of Black religious work that is affirming struggles about democracy. I have to remind even my fellow scholars that you can't deal with the great social issues without thinking about the spaces which created and trained leaders to be something. I mean, I got training to be a kid, right? I mean, that's just, you don't think about it as a time. You think you're being tortured at times, right? But you also are being trained to speak to people, to not look at your shoes, to speak up, to run meetings, to think about organizing. One of my great worries for the coming generation is that's a loss. And we have to figure out how to speak to the new needs. Back to this, the death of King is where I step in. And it was a seminal moment for me as an 11-year-old, that assassination. I still have my own copy of the New Orleans Time-Picayune that I saved from that moment. It's in Mylar now, but I kept that moment because it was like, wow, what is the world about? So that's where I pick up, and I decided to write a book. Here's the thing. My colleague and my seminary classmate, who is now just retired, Heidi Peterson, sent me a clip from when we both entered McCormick. We are all in the newsletter. And in the clip, it had me thinking, like, I'm thinking about ideas and how ideas work, and I'm thinking about what the death of Martin Luther King Jr. said. I said, well, okay, now it's time to write a book about this, because I've been thinking about denominations, what they mean for us in the culture. Now I'm going to just I'm going to cut this video off. How do I, take it down? And I'm going to just give you a couple of opening pages here, just what I wrote. So in the first chapter, it's called Network of Mutuality, and I just want to read you a couple of pages here. And I write, and each one of these are addressed to King as a letter. And I say, Martin, I read that some of your closest peers called you Martin and others called you Mike. I thought of you as Martin after seeing your photograph in John Williams' book, The King That God Didn't Save, when I was 13. There was only you and Andrew Young in the Birmingham airport. Around 4 a.m., you were slumped over with a cigarette in your hand, exhausted. You were weary like the men who labored in my childhood neighborhood of New Orleans, drooped over after weeks' worth of physical toil from jobs that paid too little money. They were like you, trying to preserve enough energy to enjoy families and friends. They too slumped over in bar rooms and on their front porches with a cigarette and a beer, fatigued. The photograph reminded me of Southern black and white men known only by their initials, not their full names. To me, you were not Mike, your former birth name and nickname. The name bore a childhood familiarity I dared not broach. In my eyes, you were Martin in the same way that there were EJs and ABs throughout the South. At 13 years of age, that photograph offered me a lesson in your humanity. You were not the icon of Ebony magazine. You were the exhausted worker. The photograph was not the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It was Martin, the overworked laborer. The toil of your labor had taken it out of you. As exhausted as you appeared to be in that photo, there was still something beautiful about it. You were James Brown short. You looked like the dark-skinned men in my communities whom I saw at the barbershop, in church, on the street corners. You held the same black handsomeness that U.S. society so fears. This is something men in our community loved about you secretly, even if they disagreed with you on questions of self-defense. You were dark as they were, short with a black African nose, and you had hair that you brushed to smooth out the naps. Further, you shared black hilarity. Behind closed doors, you exhibited stylistically the irreverent ribald humor that I heard from men on my streets and from my uncles. You were filled with off-color remarks, wisecracks on topics from politics to sex. And though you looked so dark tired, I wondered what you told Andrew Young as the two of you waited for the airplane back to Atlanta. I'm certain that even in your weariness, there was a funny exchange. The blues, the serious merriment. As I look back on that captured moment now, I'm sure you and Young had laughable, signifying moments about the dire situations that the movement faced. You had to laugh to keep from crying. The fact is that your constant toiling on the road took you away from home too much. You spent nearly all your adult life on the road organizing to build a truly democratic society. This was your zeitgeist, the spirit of the time. And that's how I wanted to approach this material that I had, because I was asked to come to Elmhurst University. It was once Elmhurst College, like it was once Calvin College. I still am trying to get my head around Calvin University. I prefer Calvin College, but that's me. But Elmhurst College is where two great American theologians attended, Reinhold Niebuhr and H. Richard Niebuhr. And so I was asked to come and do Martin Luther King Day talk there. And I was like, oh man, how, because, you know, students are into feelings now. And, you know, feelings, I don't know what to do with it, because I was reared by people born during the Great Depression, right? And there was no such thing as a feeling. Many of you all know what I'm talking about. It's duty, is get up and go to work. They loved you, but they wasn't like, oh, touchy-feely. No. And now I have students like, I feel, and I don't, I'm like, okay, I don't know quite what to do with that. I'm a generation like, feel? What's feelings about? What do you mean you feel? I can hear my grandmother, you feel? You're going to feel and go get that work done. That's what you're going to feel. So I decided that students don't write letters anymore, but letters are intimate. When people don't write anymore, we text, I see you at 5, be there. Even emails are not letters in the same way, because letter you have to take your time. And you have to sit down and write and say what you're thinking. And when somebody sends you a letter, you got to hopefully, respond with a thoughtfulness. So I said, okay, you know what I'm going to do for these students is write this as though I'm giving a letter. And they liked what I did. And I was like, okay, I got something here. And I wanted to just then think about the kind of great issues surrounding about democracy. No, I'll be bold enough to say no group has thought about democracy more than African American. Not because we're any special, but we've had to. No people in the United States has thought about these questions of great democracy. Look, the 1920s, you all think this moment is so different. I did like the 1920s, right? The 1920s, the Ku Klux Klan elected people to office. Took over Grand Rapids, basically on the west side, right? All over the place. So African Americans have had to deal with the crisis of democracy all the time. Maybe Asian Americans with the Chinese Exclusion Act, but the questions of Jim Crow coming before the Supreme Court, questions of wholesale murders in the state of Louisiana, the Colfax Massacre, the Thibodeau Massacre. I can go down and list you the massacres that nobody around here would like that didn't happen in the United States. Yes, it did. Over the right to work and the right to get to free pay. So no group has dealt with democracy more. But in the scholarly world, there's all this highfalutin stuff, and I read in the paper the elite columnists, and nobody's writing from an African American perspective. And then I decided, okay, you know what I want to do? I want to say something about democracy that encompasses black people in a long tradition in history, in a struggle about how to be reverent and how to resist tyrannical forces. And so I decided, okay, everybody knows Martin Luther King Jr. because I get asked this, I've been asked this, why Martin Luther King Jr.? And I always say, well, look, why Lincoln? How many books have been written on Lincoln? Or in history, we say there are more books written on there's more ink spilled than blood now about the Civil War, right? So it was important for us to try to, in light of the crisis that began in 2014 in Ferguson, that I wanted to give some reflections and some thoughts about the various issues, the various ways globally to thinking about it. In 2015, I was lucky enough to spend a wonderful semester in the Czech Republic. And cushy job, y'all. Europeans know how to treat professors. They really do, we haven't had Professor Jelks. I'll go to Germany. They know how to give a professor a good time. It ruins you because back here, you come home and it's like, what you do? but in the Czech Republic, I teach this class about African Americans, and it's oversubscribed. And I'm like, what? Right? And these students, I teach at a Masaryk University in the Czech Republic. Charles is in Prague, that's their Harvard. Masaryk is their Yale, right? So these students are so oversubscribed. I've got 50 students, and normally the class should have been about, I was told 18, but I have 50 students. And students inform me that what they looked at, the kind of Velvet Revolution, what they looked for was not all Americans, they were looking at black Americans, right? And I was shocked, right? All over, when I gave talks, people came out because they saw the global significance of what the civil rights movement had done. It wasn't just a local US thing, it was globally significant for people. And then I remembered in Tiananmen Square, in 1989, there's a young man facing a tank with a sash on saying, "We shall overcome." And I was like, okay, there is something globally significant here. Not because African Americans are special. I'm still a Calvinist. As my grandmother would put it, God don't like ugly, and ain't too particular about pretty. And that's a really important thing for us to know, that all people have the capacity. I'm not a Methodist. I don't believe in perfection. All people have the capacity to do really heinous, harmful things all over the world. That's called sin, y'all, right? The sin is the idea that we aggrandize power and we keep power for ourselves. That's what John Calvin, at his very best, really meant about sin, right? Not, that we have the capacity, this is my pew and nobody else gets to sit here. We have that power. And so I wanted to just write about this and thinking about the kind of various conditions and the various ways we deal with it. And I wanted to take a step back. And so I wanted to address these letters to a generation who doesn't think about what's the cost of leadership? Lynette, you come into a new institution and it's got all of its traditions and you're getting, everybody's coming this way and that way. Leadership is, and it's sacrificial. It's a pain in the butt, whether you run a business or anything. Because, like I always tell my deans, yeah, I know you got people like me. I want. Of course I'm right. And the dean's right, with the limitations of that. So all leadership, the questions of police violence, this is not a new question coming along. And so what we have to think about is how we want to live in a democratic society. And I think people have to think about that question even more, and particularly traditions like the Presbyterian Church, right? Where do we begin, right? We want to have churches, the very history of Scotland is surrounded by this question of religious freedom. So that's the beginning of democracy. And if we're going to give religious freedom to one group, this is one thing Jefferson and Madison were really spot on, then we have to give it to all people, even when we think they're crazy or they think we're crazy, right? So this is the kind of impetus that we have to think about today. I wanted to address this issue. I could have wrote a more Thomish kind of book with philosophically fine points, but I really wanted to get to the heart, something I'll talk about tomorrow. But the heart, the kind of where the seat of the will is, it's not always, we always try to explain in our society, these fine points, but what we ought to be thinking about is really building community and building community where we can all live and exist. And that's why this book, I felt passionate about this book. And I'm lucky, my publisher felt like they told me oh, we want to really publish I had to find an age for this book, different than academic books, but this was on a trade press, and to find an agent who was willing to take a risk on something about when you're talking about the inner life, and that's very important. So that's how I came to this book. That's how I've been thinking about it. And I can't think of no better place than to talk about this than here. Because, I came here to change Grand Rapids. I don't know if I did. Change goes both ways. People in Grand Rapids changed me, and I hope I inched the ball a little further, and so forth. So that's why. So I'm going to stop talking, and many of you all haven't read the book, but y'all should. I think it's good. And it's been wonderful for me to from YouTube to PBS books to talk about this in a different way. Well, what we need to talk about, whatever you all call spirituality, you can't have democracy without a sense of spirituality. It's the golden rule, Democracy is you got to treat your neighbor as yourself. And that is the fundamentals of democracy. Now, I have lots of people in universities say, "Oh, we believe in democracy." Not really, because what you do in university is pretty bad, But yeah, being a university professor is not as glamorous as people think. Right, Doug? This is so we all have to kind of take stock of ourselves, and that's what I think we all have to. And I gave this talk at Elmhurst shortly after Donald Trump was inaugurated, and it was I hope it brings people thought and as one of my blurbers says, hope. That was my hope. Yeah. So questions. We'll have to use the microphone. Where's the, oh.
Sit on, yep.
Yeah. Doug, go ahead. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Randall, for very enlightening. I learned so much. I thought I knew something about history, but not the part that you've explained. But what I want to ask...
That's why I get paid the big bucks.
In the work that I'm doing now with interfaith, it's really interesting to me that the theology of the black church and the theology of the white conservative church is very similar. But there's so much political difference in terms of how they translate that into what is happening in our country about democracy. And can you give us some insight as to how to approach that issue?
Yeah, black churches are evangelical in the sense of that they would want to share their good news with you. But black churches have seen the underbelly of the society. Many evangelical churches, white evangelical churches, are feeling like they are losing hold of society, first of all. Society demographically has changed, right? My colleague and I have just completed a documentary film called Garden City, about Garden City, Kansas, attempted bombing of a mosque in Garden City, Kansas, Somali mosque. All of these different immigrants have moved in because it's meatpacking in this town of Garden City. It's one of the most diverse cities in Kansas, right? And so people feel threatened by this diversity that is coming along, like they felt threatened in the 1850s with Catholics coming into the United States. The Irish Catholic Know-Nothings, and the Know-Nothing Party, and all of this other. So there's a real threat. If you associate your faith with the state alone, and you think you control the state, then that's the issues. And of course, some of this is about resentment, has nothing to do with religion at all. It has to do, we all do well a little bit of Karl Marx. You can say Karl Marx might not have the right answer, but he certainly asked the right questions. The questions of economics. I was just yesterday in Fort Scott, Kansas. And Fort Scott, Kansas is the central site of the Western Front of the Civil War. And I saw a house with a flag on it. It's like, what is that? I mean, this is Kansas. This is the border wars. This is the frontier. So what does that represent? That represents that I'm resentful that you tear some kind of freedom away. And the ideology about economics, which the church has not criticized. I mean, University of Chicago, what I did a lot of hanging out at, ought to be criticized for the ways we think about economics. They're not even thinking about that good Scottish guy, Adam Smith, who says there's an immoral economy. And we have to think about the economy in lots of different ways. workers, when I was heavily involved in the Presbyterian, I tried to get the Presbyterian of Lake Michigan to think about the economic structures. What would happen to churches in this area? Heavily dependent on old-style industry. And people are displaced. Workers don't make enough money. Yeah, you know, I sound like a wild-eyed socialist, but there's some truth there. Sparta had the same problem as the inner city of Grand Rapids. Same problems. It just spread out. Educational levels, right? I mean, opportunity structures, same exact problems. When you think about your religion as of holding a certain image of the state, then you have problems. And our churches certainly haven't done a good job of looking at those structural issues that just right now issue. Grand Rapids today, it blows my mind. How's a young family buy a home? How a young family buy a home? How do you buy a home? Across the street from us, we downsized and moved in Alger Heights, which was a World War II starter home that's going for $200,000 or more. I think we'd be homeless if we were starting out today, right? I mean, that's crazy. Not that, you know, so we have to think about these things structurally in a more expansive way. Black churches have had to think about that people don't have jobs. How do we think about that in a way that had to be a consciousness about that? Sometimes compromises. Big city pastors compromise with political bosses so that their people could get a job. Right? So you have to think about those things that now is new to the more white evangelicals who started off just like those black churches, you know, Swedish Baptist, Swedish Covenant, whatever, and so forth. Yeah.
I've heard that in the slave trade, that at least 1/3 to maybe 1/2 of the slaves came from Muslim communities and brought their Muslim theology with them.
Yeah, that's actual factual. That's why in New York, people are buried facing the east. When they tore down the building on Wall Street, you know, Wall Street, slaves were buried, quote, outside the wall, and, you know, so forth. So I remind my Dutch colleagues, you know, y'all got you owe me something. Yes, question. You got to use the mic, though.
Can you pass that over
there? I don't know. Who has a question? You all like my students. Come on. Yes.
I have a question. Sometimes we get concerned, even in this church, that we don't have enough people of color in our church. And that doesn't bother me because I think your church has so much and you want to have what you have, and I wouldn't want it to be diluted in any way. And
that doesn't bother me either. So, I mean, the question is, churches are formed for different communities all over the place. So one of my mentors as a theological student was Jeremiah Wright. And I think the world of Jeremiah Wright, Trinity, UCC, was for black middle class people. It wasn't for the black poor. But Trinity formed a relationship with different storefront that served people that they couldn't serve as a support system, right? We can't all do the same thing. Churches are institutions, they have different needs, different people, so forth. But the relationship with other congregations, look, you're also a part of the Great Lakes system, and I'm gonna be just blunt with y'all. Grand Rapids is the most racist place I've ever lived in my life. Just blunt. I'm just gonna be blunt. I grew up in the South. I actually am a child of the South. And this nice nasty of the Grand Rapids, it's terrible. Yeah, it's terrible. It's a terrible blight on this. It's a good city, but it's terrible. You don't know anybody else besides yourself, right? You don't speak to anybody else by yourself. I grew up with white people all my life. That's nothing new in the South. It's good morning, good afternoon. Everybody spoke to each other. Now there's a hierarchy. You know, I was a part of that generation who wanted to break the hierarchy, but not the social relationship, right? The Midwest as a place, Chicago, South Bend, is, again, this is structural kinds of ways, is ways that people isolate into first ethnic enclaves and block off. And then we put in public policy to block people off from even having interaction with one another. So I tell my students, even in Kansas, like, none of y'all live in New York. You don't have to ride the subway with everybody. So you only see the people who look like you, but there are people who are different than ourselves. And we have to figure out that in this region of the world. And it prevents even young black middle class kids from entering into the system. Do you know, I have to say this, that black college age kids have to go elsewhere to find a job. They can't work in this city.
That's right.
And they go elsewhere, and then somebody's like, well, that guy's from Grand Rapids, he made it big. He can't come home. And that's a structural issue that we all have to talk about. How to do that, and how to think about that. Because the way our structures are, we only see one group of people, and so forth. Yeah.
Yeah, Randall, could you, for democracy, I think you do a good job of the background of the interplay between how commerce comes into conflict with democracy principles of egalitarian and, you know, equal voice and equal representation. But I was wondering, could you just real briefly share the history of your ancestor on your mom's side of what has occurred relative to the Georgetown thing? Because I think that shows why there is, for Black Americans, there's always that tension of how will we ever get on the same page with our democratic frame of reference, because things keep happening to, you know, people were surprised that Jefferson had 8 black children, you know.
I wasn't.
I know. You told me about it long ago. But I just raised that to say, if you could share your story about your family, just real briefly, about how commerce conflicts with democratic principles from way back.
Sure. So Georgetown University has been in the news on slaves in and around Maryland and so forth to support the institution, right? One of my first cousins, Robert, took the swab, said, I'm going to test out and see if we're related to them. Oh, yeah, I'm not. this is my paranoia. I'm not giving the government that information on my swab. So he took the swab, and all of a sudden, ping, 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 that my great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was in Louisiana. And it so happened, a colleague, Adam Street Park, was over this Georgetown slavery project, and he said, Jelks, I knew you were going to show up in this thing, right? I got a call from the Georgetown genealogist, and the conversation about Georgetown selling slaves in Louisiana, and all of these various communities. And a part of that sale was one of my ancestors. And her name was Carrie, and a name that stayed in my family, and is still in my family. This summer, Mary Beth and I were down in Louisiana, in Donaldsonville, Louisiana, for an event. And then she met my cousin Harriet, whose name has still, the name still continues in the family. Institutions all were part of slavery. No institution, gets away with that. Princeton University was the southernmost. Princeton was the southernmost of the islands, right? People came with their slaves. Witherspoon Presbyterian Church. If you've ever been to Princeton, on the main drag is Nassau Presbyterian Church, that big, glorious Presbyterian church sitting up there. But down the road is Witherspoon Presbyterian Church. The pastor of Witherspoon Presbyterian Church was named Robeson. And his son was Paul Robeson. And you ought to, Paul Robeson writes at the beginning of his, again, Presbyterian. His father quits the Presbyterian church because it doesn't want to deal with the issues surrounding what is going on. And of course, Witherspoon was initially a church for enslaved people, and then it becomes the church of the servants. And George Carl Oates had a wonderful Gothic kind of novel called The Accursed. If you just want to read a Gothic kind of novel, The Accursed, it's about Princeton being haunted. And the devil comes to Princeton, and I love it. But the commerce is what we all have to acknowledge. There's no, like I tell students all the time, none of us has to be born when we're born. We get off the hook there. I mean, if you're born in 1930, you're born in 1930. I was born in 1956. I didn't have to be born where I'm born. But what I do have a responsibility, as I always tell students, is to understand the moment that I was born in, and understand the context in which I was born in, and to understand that there are many different factors going on. And if you have a Eurocentric focus, you only see the world from one side. Commerce changed the world. Slavery, by all measures, Robert Hogaman won a Nobel Prize for this. Slavery helped build slaves work capital. You put a price on people's lives, right? Now we're going to soon be putting price on robots. How much robots will be measured by? But at one time, throughout world history, slavery has been an institution. That's not to excuse it, because our Romans, right? Paul tries to spiritualize slavery. It's like, I'm a slave of Jesus Christ. Well, that doesn't help much if you're actually enslaved and trying to run away. And the Romans were just as brutal. There is no system in world history that's not brutal. The Greeks called other people barbarians. They dismissed people. People, like I said, this is what Calvin understood as a reader of history, that that history is full of depravity. Our stand is that there is hope, and that we come to be liberated. That's why that liberating language, that we're all one in the unity of Christ. That's why that language comes, that we all come before a just God. But commerce overtakes that. I mean, greed is something, and it blinds you you would never think in Rome there were the Etruscans, or you would never think in others, because the glory of Rome, right? Or the British. The British always like, well, we tried to stop slavery. Yeah, after you made gazillions of dollars off of it, right? And now, today, places like Barbados saying, hey, you owe us something here, right? We can't help the circumstances that we're born under, but we can have knowledge. And that knowledge is often challenging. It's like me as a man, saying, I don't know what these women are complaining about. But then you go back and read the law. Already in the Bible, the dude already blames Eve first. It was her, not me. It was her, right? That repeats itself when we're not cognizant of the power structures, and sometimes we can't do as much as we want about it. So really, there's a wonderful novel that I love a lot called by Edward P. Jones. He writes about black slavery, and he gets at the heart of this question of power that comes in society in general. This is the questions that King at times about the kind of ways we make ourselves into things. This is a constant question that we have to keep before us. It's not just this, the people are so bad. It's that the rules force you into some things that you may or may not want to, right? So we have to think about those things, that churches, thinking people in general have to think about it. Yes.
Is this on? Randall, it's somewhat related to your book about blacks have wrestled with democracy issues for a long time. This morning on NPR, I hear that for this upcoming midterm election, the concern is that the people of color and the youth are less likely to vote because it's not a presidential election. Is your take different on that, given the history of black people?
Yeah, well,
struggling for
depending on where
democracy?
you are, you have ample reason to go out and vote if you're in Georgia right now. Maybe not so much in Grand Rapids, right? I've had this conversation with Hillary Scholten. So why should people vote for you? You got to speak to their interests as working people. We talk about the working class. They are only white. Black people are working class, and they're not, Hispanic people are working class. So you got to talk to their interests and talk to people with respect as though they are participants, that they can be. Want them, not at the last minute. I need your vote. Oh, I need your vote. No, that I really respect that you want to, like everybody else, have a home, whatever crucial we say that comes with American life. Come on, don't be like my students. It's called The Known World. Edward P. Jones. And he's a great short story writer, just marvelous. And all his short stories take place in Washington, D.C. This is about slavery. It's a novel. It won the National Book Award back about 15 years ago. Yeah, it was a wonderful novel. I thought everybody should read it because it deals with questions of power and culture in a way that's surprising. And lots of African Americans in the middle class were upset about the novel. Well, why did he have to pick a black person to be a slave owner? I understood because he wanted to depict that what power does to people, what power does to all of us. Because once you don't have to think about yourself consciously, you're in power. If you don't have to think about yourself consciously, I have to think about myself all the time, right? I told my students the other day, I come out the library at 10 o'clock at KU's campus, right? And I have tennis shoes on and a sweatshirt, picking up some books or dropping some books off, and I'm walking, because my little apartment is about a mile from the library, and I walk up the hill to go do that. All of a sudden, campus police don't see me as Professor Jelks. They just see me as a black dude walking down the street, right? And suddenly it's slowing, and I'm looking around like, who are they looking for? I'm not thinking about myself, but they see me as an image as opposed to as I'm just somebody dropped off books at the library. Because I'm perpetually late, even with professors' long expanding things. I'm always getting my librarian friends, can you clean that file up for me? See, I'm using my power, right?
Before I turn over the mic, do you think racism is the biggest threat to democracy, or what do you think is the biggest threat to democracy?
Racism is a form of power. So you use power wherever you can to divide people, right? I mean, all kinds of ways of creating division. And Richard Nixon was one of our most divisive presidents. And again, I know people get it, but the language that he uses, you could hear it. It's like, remember, he said there was a silent majority. Who's the vocal minority, right? These speeches. Now, if you lived back in the Nixon era, the silent majority, who's the vocal minority. So these are always been to divide people, right? The politics is you got to have your team come out and the other team back. And that, Grand Rapids hiring practices. I wrote that first book on Grand Rapids. The hiring practices, like, I'm going to get you to come work for American Seating. You all going to be Polish. And I'm going to get your cousin working, but we're not going to have other people work. Now it creates division. Or we go out on strike. The Dutch preached the Dutch workers off the strike. To this day, when I go on the west side of Grand Rapids, I can hear some old guy say, my grandfather in 1910, and those Dutch, well, I can't tell you what they say. They left the strike, right? Divisions are about interests in ethnic groups or way we frame ourselves. What is the collective issue that we have and don't have in common? And that's just among people of European descent. So when you add black workers, I can't even get a job. Then you're called strike breakers, scabs, other things. So way we use division, whether it's for the economic interest or whether it's for political power interest, is always something that we have to kind of measure and talk about and think about. And you can't think about these things all the time because you get tired, you get a headache. But we do have to consider it. Our organizations have. I could, like I said to you, get the Presbyterian of Lake Michigan to think about the future around the economic structures that supported our churches. So now you go to First Church Battle Creek, it's a shell of itself, because at one time, all the people who were members at First Church Battle Creek worked for Kellogg. So what happens when that organization shifts? When we came to Grand Rapids in 1983, it wasn't just Pfizer, but they made up all the people who went to First Pres, Kalamazoo. What happens when the economic structure changes? Now, if it happens there, what happens to the economic structure that changes for people who were working? Well, like Grand Rapids, black workers worked at GM on 36th Street. Provide a whole bunch of jobs, right, at one time. The only place that outside of the school system that black people could get jobs. But 36th Street plan hired all those people around Wyoming. All of the other areas. So we have to think about these kind of economic structures. We talk about them. Listen, I'm not opposed to people making money. I'm not. I think there's good stewardship that comes with it. Whatever I have to say about John D. Rockefeller, a lot of it's bad, but I also have to say he was of an age that gave money to build institutions, and that at least I went to McCormick Seminary, named after Cyrus McCormick. Now, really, Cyrus didn't do a doggone thing to build that seminary, but Mrs. McCormick, it should really be named after her. Because I went, like, just being a nosy kid going to the letters, like, oh, she made Cyrus put money in Hanover, and then it becomes McCormick, right? Thank God for them wives, man. I'm telling you, because that's why we get a McCormick Seminary in Chicago, and they eventually moved from Indiana to Chicago, and so forth. Yes.
We have a few more questions. One from online. I know we have one over here.
What's the online?
And one over, yeah, we've had about 18 people watching and streaming in online. And our question comes from Sonia Fryer. Yeah. And maybe you started answering it with the hiring practices and things, but she asks, how do we affect change towards racial justice in our community of Grand Rapids and at WPC?
Well, the question is, how do we affect justice? Always. I mean, that's always the wrestle for all of us. So let's admit that. We all have to wrestle with how do we affect justice, right? I'm a professor at university. I'm in a rarefied air. I'm in a privileged position, right? How do I get people to come after me in that position? I'm a dinosaur, too. Because you can pay somebody and do it online, right? They won't be as good as I am, but But these are all the questions that we have to wrestle with. I really don't have answers. I don't want to say I have answers. That would be unfair. But I do want to have wrestle, because being faithful people wrestle. It's not the simplistic answer. Because one answer may make a whole set of other problems. But we do have to wrestle with these. Fundamentally, that is the core of being faithful, is the wrestle. And Westminster provides forums, right? Fountain Street provides forums. So we can have forums for discussion and other kinds of things. I wish I'd be on, Oprah's not on TV anymore, but I'd be on Oprah if I had to answer and really be selling some books. I do know that faithful is being to wrestle with the kind of great things. I think about how we talk about Ukraine. And it's really important that we talk about Ukraine. But we don't talk about Eastern Congo. Eastern Congo is where comes from. Just all the displacement. all the people who are refugees in Grand Rapids who've come from Eastern Congo because of the kind of struggle going on there. So what we in the Presbyterian Church has wrestled with Congo for years. First person to do it, Presbyterians, a missionary named Henry Shepherd, and y'all all should look him up because it's Henry Shepherd who challenges the Belgian king when it was the Belgian Congo. He's a black Presbyterian. He and his wife, they're challenging the king of Belgium who took over Congo as his own territory. Y'all all should know about Henry Shepherd. He goes on trial. So it's this great wrestling with these issues that are before us. That's what our job is. I can't tell you I have the answers because I don't. And I'm humble enough to say that. But I think we have to wrestle with these issues. What benefits? What kind of school system do we have? What school systems do we have? Do we want a school system, the kind of chartered, where Betsy DeVos? Do we need a good public school? Why is public schools important? Throughout this, one of the great histories of black people in the South was to advocate for public education. It was a revolution, yeah. Yes, that's correct. Now, there are some benefits. I went to a little Lutheran school. I'm not going to say, that, and it saved me. That's why I'm here. And I really mean this. I went to a small little Lutheran school with all black teachers, taught me, because it gave me esteem about myself. That's why I can stand here before you, because I had a sense of myself that people looked like me were my teachers, and it gave me a sense of power. And it's at the very moment that the school around the corner was desegregating, where parents were literally yelling at kids, 2, 4, 6, 8, we don't want a nigger grade. So, and I saw that's not something I'm making up. I saw that with my own eyes as my mother's walking me to my little Lutheran school. So they're both. They sit side by side, but we have to talk about the benefit of one or the other. My mom, I don't know how my parents were divorced. I don't know how she squeezed out the money, but she squeezed out the money to pay the tuition and so forth. So there are both sides to this. Yeah.
You were talking about public education, and you talked about in 1960 or 61 was a high point for church attendance, but also was high point during that time for fraternal organizations of both men and women, civic involvement. Right. Do you ever see, like in the next 25 or 50 years, do you think this is going to keep going downhill, or that maybe we'll have some revival of institutional life?
Well, Black Lives Matter, those kids were civically engaged. People put them down, but they were civically engaged. An injustice happened, they took to the street. That is, under the Constitution, the right thing to do. Everybody should take to the streets. Black Lives Matter was civically engaged. The question is, they're young. So sometimes young people get a little bit, way out there, right? Because you think you're going to solve everything. But we should have encouraged all kinds of people to get civically engaged. I told my students, if I were a student today, the way the student loan system runs, y'all should be out in the streets. My Czech students couldn't put around their head how Americans work. So like if you get in a university, a public university in the Czech Republic, you can go to, you pay, but you go to a public university in the Czech Republic, you pay your housing and some school fees. No system of taking out loans in the same way. So they couldn't get around, why do you all take out loans for public education? if you say grades and whatever skill sets that you have to have, you know, living in the Czech Republic, I talked to a lot of Roma, we call pejorative gypsies. I spent a lot of time, talking and they found the same discrimination of trying to get in school, other things, all through Central Europe and all the way into Eastern Europe. So we have these systems, and we have to talk about them. And in the United States, I still believe we're blessed to be able to keep arguing publicly about these things. Because I've been in countries where you can't argue publicly. So we still have the right. But there are people want to be civically engaged. I don't think online always helps, right? Because Facebook starts more mess in families than anything. Because people don't talk to each other anymore. They just like, you know what they said on Facebook? Well, why don't you pick up the phone and call them? What you mean? No, that's too much. That's people don't pick up the phone. They text each other, right? You know, that's how I get my kids. Call me, please. Please call me.
Have a couple minutes left for a few more questions. So, Mark.
I would like to ask kind of a practical question. Is the mic working?
Go ahead, ask practical, because I'm an academic. What are you?
I had to throw you a slow pitch, but anyway, and maybe this will work out in the kitchen table. So I sit on a committee in Grand Rapids, it's a safety committee, appointed by the city commission with oversight of the police, fire, and so forth. And so having worked on this for a number of years, the thing I want to propose is that we hire more police officers, but that they be black, brown, and representative of the whole culture, women, whatever, you know, based on whatever studies come out of that. Would this audience support that? Because it gets specific in terms of targeting hiring. The second part of that is what I know is that we need representation of that same group in the police officers command unit, of which there are 22 officers, and that's where I think things get stuck in terms of protocol.
Well, yes. I would say, first of all, I heard in my ear for years about officers. Mary Beth, as a city official at one time, she's jumped ship to the museum. But I did hear a lot about police officers. First of all, all studies about police officers, it doesn't matter who the police officers are, they look at certain communities badly because they're trained to do that. All police officers, this is black police officers as well. They are more suspicious of young black people than anybody. So we have to do some different training. Second, here's practical. In the old days when I came to Grand Rapids, we had much better relationships because we had neighborhood and we did crime prevention because everybody in the neighborhood wanted crime prevention. So I used to talk to the postman when we lived on Sherman Street when it was considered the hood. Now East Town is not considered the hood. I just saw the house that was next door to us that used to be, when it's going for $300,000. I was like, whoa, you know. So I used to talk to the postman because the postman knew every criminal there was. Postman never got robbed either, right? No, nobody ever heard the postman got a stick up, right? You know. And I would say, well, how do you know who did this? Well, you know, Miss Jones down the street talked to me all the time. No police officer had a relationship with the people in the community. They were seen as adversarial to their interests. And that's a problem. So we have to change policing. So there are some fundamental ways that policing has to be changed. It's over militarized, in my opinion. and that's when kids talk about defunding the police. They're also talking about bigger issues that I'm just using Michigan as Governor Engler cut mental health workers that used to work on Division Street. People who had made relationships with people could give them sometimes, some people needed medication and they had relationship, needle exchange, however you feel about drugs, but there were relationships. So we need a balance of the policing. We do need more. Grand Rapids is terribly into police. 45 square miles. This city is a big landmass. We do need more police. I'm no argument there, but we also have to ask the question of policing alone in that fashion is you can't solve everything. Police sometimes go into a domestic dispute, ramp up the things. So what's the balance? And that's where I want to. I wish we could have talked about this, not just as a defund the police, but it was a good slogan. But we do need more policing in Grand Rapids. We need more bodies because it's a large landmass. And until we change gun laws, if we're going to change gun laws, proportionately, Switzerland has just as many guns as the United States. But look at the violence. One, nobody, to drive your car, now if you've been in the car with your kids, how many hours your kids have to have practice now to be in the car? We don't say they have to have any practice at all for a gun. And I think those are kinds of things that are practical, but the politics of it is that I'm trying to win have the majority in the state Senate, so I'm not going to come out and say, this is impractical. Those are the kinds of issues. But you're right. The practical thing, we need more diverse police officers. We need less testosterone in the police force, right? I remember my kid riding his bike, going fishing at Reed's Lake with his friends, and they had a new rule in East that you have to have a helmet on. So woman officers say, hey guys, the next time you're going fishing, you got to remember to wear your helmet. 2 blocks later, guys stop them. You kids, what you doing here in East Grand Rapids, And they're like, what? We just met a police officer, and she told us the next time we had to have our helmet on. Too much testosterone, too much militarized, and with 11-year-olds, you really don't have to boss them around. You just tell them, wear your helmet. They'll wear their helmet and take their fishing poles to Reed's Lake. That kind of, because on the other side, mostly you're dealing with guys on the street. Well, now you got your gun, I'm gonna go get my gun, and then we're gonna have this, shootout at the OK Corral. Let's just kind of lower the hams. So that's why I say more women officers would be well too, As long as we don't train them to be, some things require force. No question about it. And it's a tragedy when force is required. But more things require when the police officers were on their bikes talking to kids, then they knew them and say, oh, okay. When you're just driving by in the car, you look more ominous. And so we have to have some balances there. And that's going to be a challenge. Do we want to pay the taxes? This is West Michigan. We don't pay the taxes. We'd be crying about that. But we want the police officers, but we don't want to pay for them. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think that, but it's the case of not the management system. It's the case of the politicians have to go to their people, their constituents, and say, look, this is what we have to do. That's how our city charter is written. It's up to the commissioners to really make the case to the general public of what we'd like to see and so forth, and have that conversation around. Thank you for that question. That's a great question. Yeah, policing, we all need. I'm all for it. Thank you all.
Mostly.
Coming up, especially.
Mostly thank you for being here and coming. And Randall is, of course, preaching tomorrow morning to kick off our stewardship series and on our Hearts Wide Open. So looking forward to that tomorrow morning. And then there'll be another space for some more kind of after-sermon Q&A in the chapel tomorrow morning as well. So more good things to come. Big thank you to Heather back there, who made our bran blueberry muffins this morning and some chocolate chip cookies as well. So there are more kind of snacks out there, so please grab some stuff and refuel on your way out, or even grab some stuff and stay and converse with each other for a few minutes afterwards, or with Randall afterwards as well. So how about we close in prayer? Holy One, for big conversations and for Saturday mornings where we can open our hearts and minds and ears and eyes. Thank you for all the ways that we encounter your word and all the ways you speak in our lives. And this morning for the heart and voice of Randall and speaking through him. May you continue to hold this world and this city and this long work of which we have much left to do. And so in this silent pause, we hold Randall's voice, we hold all of those who seek justice in our congregation, in our denomination, and in our city, in our hearts and prayers at this time. Lord, hear all our prayers. And Lord, make us one and renew our hearts and visions for your promises and your good reign among us. We pray in all of your holy names. Amen.